Does 24 gigabytes supercharge the M2 chip that is in the new M2 MacBook Air and MacBook Pro? Well, nobody has actually tested it side by side, so today we will find out once and for all with real-world productivity apps and tests. Now, you previously had to jump up to 32 gigabytes, but now if you're already getting the 16 gigabyte, which has a huge speed improvement over the 8 gig model, you only have to spend $200 more to jump up to the 24 gigabyte. And will the extra RAM and the different bandwidths help a lot? Let's take a look. Now, right out of the gate, we are using close to 5 gigabytes of RAM with nothing open other than our Creative Cloud application that's small in the background. So that's why some people don't want to get the 8 gig model already, because you dump into swap like we showed before by just even opening up web browsing. And a lot of people want to avoid swap so they can extend their SSD life, and maybe the 24 gig model is going to really help with that. And even if we open up Pro applications, it will stay out from using the SSD. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is open up some web browsing tabs, because if you're using a system like this and you're upgrading the RAM, you're definitely going to be having some stuff open. Honestly, I think everybody does. Now, I only opened up 5 tabs. I have my email, my Google Drive loaded up, a YouTube video playing in the background like I often do, either music or podcast or something. And then I have IGN opened up right here, which does have a lot of media. And then The Verge, which does have some auto playing ads in the background that refresh, just like a lot of websites do. So this is a pretty easy scenario. Now, I want to get some baseline performance numbers when we just have one application open, just a few web browsing tabs. I'll start out with Speedometer 2.0, which is going to test the snappiness for web-based applications and just general browsing. It looks like the performance is very similar here with Chrome, with just that open, and we'll check back later once we have more things going. Now, like many apps, Lightroom Classic can now use the GPU to accelerate your photo editing, and when you're using that, it's sharing the same RAM with the CPU because it's all in one chip. And we saw that the 8 gig model was a lot slower than the 16 gig model, even when we had nothing open but Lightroom. So let's see if 24 gigs can make it faster. Now, as far as editing the files, switching between them, and these here have all the effects already pre-added, so it has to render all of that on the fly, there is really no difference. Now, let's go ahead and hit export. I'm gonna start my timer and we'll see if we notice any gains or differences. Now, opening up the activity monitor here, wow, even now we have swap used on both of these. That is crazy. I wonder if it's using that for maybe faster performance. We have 4.6 gigs of swap on the 16 gig model and 2.4 on the 24 gig. Now, maybe if we didn't have Google Drive open or the YouTube video, then maybe it would be a little bit better, but macOS doesn't shy away from using swap. Even on my Mac Pro that has 192 gigabytes of RAM, it will still use swap, even though it's not all maxed out. Bam, we are done. And we actually had a difference. The 16 gig model finished in 1 minute and 18 seconds, which was already super fast, but the 24 gig did it in 1 minute and 8 seconds. So that's a difference of over 10%, which is, pretty impressive if you're already spending a lot of money on the system. Now, keep in mind that if you're gonna be exporting a lot of images, say 300 for portrait shooters, family shooters, or 1,000 or more for wedding photographers, that will add up. And now let's test out Xcode. We are compiling our project right now, and as you see, the memory pressure and the swap used went down dramatically once we closed Lightroom, and it's very low right now. And honestly, it's interesting that it's actually there because our memory used is very low. We're only using about 9 gigs out of 16 or 24, and macOS is still wanting to use a tiny bit of swap. All right, we are done, and the export time was basically identical, 119 seconds on each one. So we're not seeing a difference. I think our previous test, even when we loaded stuff up, we saw barely any variance for Xcode. The same thing goes for Blender, where most of our projects, they would be pretty much identical in rendering, and it didn't really max out the memory. Now, there are some projects that will use a ton of memory, and if you work on those, you'll know it. So let's see what the difference is. All right, very interesting. Now, last time the 8 gig model took 37 seconds compared to 6.6 for the 16. This time, this also got the same exact time here, but the 24 gig just got 6.69. slightly longer, basically the same. So we're not seeing any difference. Now, this render right here, we're using cycles because it's faster and it's over a 6 gigabyte image that is rendered here. So there's a lot of data, but I guess that's not enough to make a difference. So let's make this a little bit tougher. And now it looks like we are running into swap on the 16 gig model, but not any more than we had before in the 24 gig. And look at that, we have 22.9 seconds, basically 23 for the 16 and 19.13 for the 24. That's still not a very big difference. And this project right here, this render is over 15 gigs in size. So personally, I would say for Blender, it's not worth spending that extra 200 bucks. And now let's test video editing with Final Cut Pro. Now for simple 4K compressed footage, even with effects, there's really no difference. Even with the 8 gig model, it did great because of the media engines and how little RAM it actually uses. Now, when it comes to tougher footage like this ProRes RAW, and we're encoding to ProRes, those new encoders in the M2 chip definitely need some extra RAM, especially if you are gonna be multitasking. Let's go ahead and export this, and I do have some color corrections applied, a LUT, and look at that, we are seeing no difference whatsoever. They're exporting exactly the same on both. Opening up the activity monitor, we did get a boost in memory pressure on both, but only the 16 gig added some swap compared to before, but the times are practically identical. In fact, the 16 gig model took 1 minute and 37 seconds compared to 1 minute and 39 seconds for the 24 gig. Now I'm gonna run that one more time, but I wanna test out multitasking performance. Usually when I'm rendering video, and this is just a short project, I will do some multitasking. I'll go do some email, some other things. So let's see if we have any difference in responsiveness. First off, let's go ahead and open up Google Drive. Bam, instant on both. Open up YouTube, instant on both, no difference. We have our IGN, we have The Verge. We are having no issues whatsoever here. Let's run speedometer as far as if you're opening up maybe some Google Docs or other web-based services. Both are just flying through this. And keep in mind, we are still exporting here at the same exact time. Here we go. It did slow down because we're exporting, but the results are the same. Actually, the 16 gig did a little bit better. This is what I love about Mac OS, that you could still do fast, responsive tasks while you're multitasking. Bam, both of these got done. Now this time around, they did take a little bit longer because we were opening up things in the background, and this really hammers the CPU and the GPU. And our 16 gig model took 1 minute and 40 seconds compared to 1 minute and 39 on the 24 gig. So very good results, and the 16 gig is holding up great. And now let's make it more difficult. I'm gonna start out by opening up more web browsing tabs. I have 15 opened up right here in Chrome, including a second email, some other websites. I'm gonna go ahead and open up Safari here, where I have 5 additional tabs opened up here with Google Sheets as well. A lot of you guys said that you have 20 or 30 tabs open, so here is 20. And it's interesting that both these are still using a little bit of swap, but our 24 gig is using a lot more actual memory. I have Final Cut still opened up here in the background with a small project, and it's not taking up that much RAM. And I'll go ahead and open up Photoshop, and I have this open often with images while I do video editing. I'm multitasking, and it looks like both of them opened it up at the same time, so there was no extra benefit. Let's go ahead and drag in these 9 images here. And now let's create an HDR. That was practically identical, taking 25 seconds, whereas before the 8 gig would definitely slow down. Let's go ahead and open up Lightroom Classic once again, and let's export these and see if we get any slowdowns. Now, as this is starting to export, let me open up our activity monitor. Wow, both of these are using a lot of swap. We have 13 gigs over here and 11 gigs over here. So only a difference of 2 gigabytes, even though we went from 16 to 24. And we have a difference of only 7 seconds, 1 minute and 11 compared to 1 minute and 18. So that is very impressive for the 16 gig model. So if you were wondering if the 16 will slow down with a lot of swap, it doesn't really. With all of that open, this video file is playing back perfectly smoothly without any issues still, even though the RAM is hit pretty hard. And exporting this, they are both chugging along at practically the same speed. In fact, for a second there, the 16 gigabyte was ahead. Now, as this is going, let's go ahead and open up Google Chrome once again, where we have 15 tabs open, and let's see if we see any kind of difference. Let's open up the Verge at the same time. All right, there you go. You guys saw that it opened up slower, meaning it's in swap here on the 16 gig. The next tab, now the 24 gig opened up slower. Let's open Electric. All right, slightly ahead on the 24 gig. The same here. How about we open up our Google Drive, which does take a lot of memory. A little bit faster on the 24 gig. What about our YouTube video? Practically the same, both are still playing. IGN here, which has a lot open. There's actually a video playing in the background, slightly faster than the 24, but nothing like the difference we saw with the 8 gig model. And as you guys saw there, both of those exported at the same time, 1 minute and 47 seconds. So both slowed down a little bit, but the performance is practically the same while we were rendering, maxing everything out and using a lot of swap. I have to say, I am very impressed with the 16 gig model, how close it's keeping up, and the fact that the 24 gig isn't really doing much of a difference. That's kind of sad when you're spending the extra money. Now, we have to throw some kind of a torture test at it. I don't think this is realistic, but everything else so far has been great. I'm gonna go ahead and hit share. We're gonna hit export file once again. Let's hit save here. I'm gonna start my timer, and I'm gonna go ahead and open up Lightroom Classic. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is just switch between these images. Okay, there you go. You guys could see, actually now it's about the same. Now the 16 gig was faster. So they're kind of trading blows here. So they're acting practically the same. Sometimes one is faster, sometimes the other is faster. We're slowing down a bit because that is a tough export. And let's go ahead and run this at the same time. So now we're exporting that ProRes RAW to ProRes file in Final Cut, and at the same time exporting photos as well while having 20 tabs open and using a ton of swap. Now, it does feel like the 24 gig is a little bit more responsive when I'm opening this stuff up, but we're not using that much more swap on the 16 gig compared to the 24. Now, you see the 24 gig actually finished the export really quickly. I mean, we're talking about 1 minute and 10 seconds. And now Lightroom is starting to actually work fast because our export is finished, whereas here, Lightroom is literally locking up, it's not doing much. And let's open up Final Cut. Oh, there you go, that one got finished. That took 1 minute and 50 seconds compared to 1 minute and 10 while we were exporting at the same time. And now it's starting to take off here. So it's almost like the 16 gig model waited for that before Lightroom took off. Our Lightroom export is done on the 24 gigabyte and now on the 16 gigabyte. So the 16 gig took 3 minutes and 50 seconds to export these 50 images. Of course, it waited for Final Cut to be done, whereas this one, it started doing Lightroom right away, but very slowly, and that took 2 minutes and 45 seconds. So still not a massive difference, and of course, who would be doing both of those exports at the same time? And as you guys saw when we were exporting and actually using Lightroom, the performance was very similar. So what is the verdict? Well, I have to say that 24 gigs did not help much at all. And this is on the M2 MacBook Pro, which does have fans. If you're using the M2 MacBook Air, that will also start throttling if you're trying to do stuff like this, 2 programs at once. And then so the RAM difference will be smaller just because you are throttling. So overall, for most people, unless you're doing something like crazy like this, you're not really gonna notice much of a difference. And I don't think it's really worth spending that extra money unless you know specifically that for your task, you need a ton of RAM. And in that case, you're probably not even watching this video because you know you need it. But for most people, even if you're doing stuff like this, where we have a ton of stuff opened, multiple pro applications, ton of web browsing tabs, the difference was a lot smaller than I personally expected. So if you're buying an M2 chip, I don't think it is worth that extra cash. Now on the M1 Pro or M1 Max, we've done videos on those where we push them even harder and we start to see some more differences. But here, my recommendation would be stick to that 16 gigs of RAM and spend that $200 on something else, like maybe upgrading the storage or maybe buying an accessory or just saving it. So there you guys go. If you want to see another great video, check out one of those right over there. Click that circle above to subscribe. Thank you for watching. It's been Max with Max Tech, and I'll see you in the next video.